Guys, it is 8 o'clock Eastern, so that means it is time for the Mossy Side with the Moose here on Beaver Politics. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. Don't forget that tapping the screen is clapping, guys, and sharing is caring. Let's get the numbers up and let's get more people involved in being here and being a part of the conversation. As always, couple things for housekeeping. Always keep in mind, guys, if you haven't joined the Beaver Network Discord, why haven't you? We are there and having conversations. So go over to our profile here on TikTok, and it should be in our link tree there, I believe, for our Discord. As well, we do have YouTube. So if you happen to miss a show, we upload all the shows all week long over on YouTube. So come catch us over there if you happen to miss something or want to rewatch. It'll be there over on YouTube. Yeah, as always, guys, we have the live gift goals going on up here at the top. If you feel compelled during the show to do so, we greatly appreciate it, but it is not expected. We can't do this without you. And remember, we are for the people, by the people, and of the people. And we do this together, not just as the Beaver Network, but as a movement of the people to hold truth to power and move the bar forward to see a better tomorrow for everybody. So, with that being said, I am going to be jumping in more to the platforms at this point. Now that we do have more information on the platforms, all the parties have given their, as they're calling it, the costed platform. So it goes more into detail in terms of numbers, financial aspects, all that sort of stuff, and what we're going to be seeing if they hold true to their promises. Um, so that's what I'll be diving into, of course. I have Smarshy up here with me now. But guys, always remember if you have any comments or questions, by all means, please send a request to come up as a guest and be a part of the conversation. We can't do things without being able to have these conversations um, and really be able to talk to one another and move forward as a whole. So, always open to the conversations. Send a guest request if you want to come up at some point as we're chatting. And yeah, let's get into it. So, I've got a whole list in front of me here of different aspects of their platforms. So I'm going to kind of jump around on the different issues or the different topics. And again, if you want to come up and chat, by all means, come on up. And I think it's important, if I can get down to where I want to be, I want to start with dealing with the tariffs slash US and where they stand on that. I think that's a good starting point. So, in terms of US relations and tariffs, now that the more detailed platforms are out for all the parties, guys, I'm going to start off with the Liberals. So, again, dealing with US relations and tariffs, the Liberals are matching 25% tariffs on all vehicle import from the US that are not compliant with CUSMA. They would inject 5 billion into a new trade diversification corridor fund. They want to regenerate bilateral agreements with the US immediately following the election in response to expected job losses in the trade war, which we've already started to see, guys, so keep that in mind. Um, we've already seen job losses. We have already seen people really going through the ringer because of all this. Um, Immediately following the election in response to the job losses in the trade war. They would temporarily remove 1 week employment insurance waiting period. They would prioritize and procure Canadian built vehicles. They would implement a $2 billion strategic response fund with the aim of protecting the Canadian auto industry and helping workers develop expertise. In the wake of the US tariffs, the Liberals are also promising to bolster food security, including by investing in greenhouses, hydroponics, fisheries, and financial support programs for farmers. So, quite a diverse kind of way of looking at things, bunch of different sectors involved there. Um, yeah, so definitely looking at more sectors than just one and trying to, I guess, spread things out to the most hard hit when it comes to the tariffs, which isn't a bad way to go about it. Conservatives, the party would continue to impose counter tariffs until the U.S. removes all of its tariffs. A conservative government would direct most of the revenue collected from counter tariffs towards tax relief. With a sum set aside for targeted relief for workers, the party would cut GST from the sale of new Canadian made cars as long as Trump's tariffs are in place. Conservatives have pledged to create a Keep Canadians Working Fund, a temporary loan and credit program that will provide up to $3 billion in short-term credit lines and low-interest loans for affected businesses. Conservatives promised to renegotiate a softwood lumber agreement with the U.S. The party would pursue a free trade and mobility agreement with the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Okay. Um, One key thing I would put into that there is they're talking about let's see here, providing up to $3 billion short-term credit lines and low interest loans for affected businesses. I think that's fantastic. Businesses are definitely going to need some help, especially smaller businesses. However, I think they do need to focus more on workers as well. Um, that's where the liberals kind of have, in my opinion, have a leg up in their platform because they talk about helping workers. They talk about the 1 week waiting period for EI. Um, Mark Carney has also talked about how they would shore up EI as well as take the revenue from tariffs and essentially be more direct in where that money goes. So to help more so, they talk about the automotive sector, which is being hit hardest, but it would be more targeted. So the people that are affected the most get the most help, which honestly just makes sense. Um, Political deep dive, join the debate, says EI. Well, I wouldn't say it's a debate, but by all means, political deep dive, absolutely. AI nailed it. Okay. Yeah. So again, guys, we're on U.S. relations and tariffs, and next up will be the New Democrats. So the New Democrats are in favor of retaliatory tariffs. They would put every dollar collected from retaliatory tariffs towards supporting impact workers in industries such as the auto manufacturing, steel, and aluminum. If US President Donald Trump applied a tariff to all Canadian goods, New Democrats would impose a 100% tariff on all Tesla products. To strengthen the economy during the trade war, an NDP government would issue 5 and 10 year victory bonds that Canadians could buy through a payroll deduction. Those bonds would pay an interest rate that is 0.25% higher than the average 5 year bank issue guaranteed investment certificate, GIC. It would bar Trump from the G7 summit in Atlanta in June due to his undermining Canadian sovereignty. The party would ban U.S. companies from all federal government procurement contracts and projects when Canadian workers are available. It says it would stop U.S. based corporations from stripping valuable assets from Canadian plants. After receiving government bailouts, it would exempt Canadian made cars and trucks from GST. You know what? Like that's a pretty solid.
So, what does it mean when they would bar Trump from the G7 summit in Canada? Like, does that mean he can't come up here at all for the G7 summit, or have we
um,
had the G7 summit
well,
yet? I
that's
just
and that's one thing. You're right, and I think that's worded a little wrong. I think they would probably try to see about barring Trump from the G7 in Atlanta, which is down in the states, I believe Georgia. Um, but essentially,
yeah.
creating a movement to stop the United States, or more so Trump, from having a seat at the table. Um,
Okay, yeah, that makes more sense. Okay, I just wanted to know because it was just like, but I thought we had a G7 summit up in Kananaskis, or have we already had that?
yeah, well, the G7 happens all the time. I think it's once a year, and it just different countries within the G7 hold it from year to year. So you see that a lot where they'll have one in I'll say the UK, I believe, wasn't too long ago. The US has had one. Canada's had a couple now, I believe. Um, so it
Yeah.
just kind of floats around.
Well, and see, that's the thing, right? Because Alberta is pro-Trump, which is embarrassing in itself, and having him in our country is not okay because he is a felon, and we're not supposed to bend the rules for felons. And
Yep.
that's a real problem I have with that. Is oh, he's a leader, yeah, but he's also a felon. He shouldn't be able to enter the country. And people get heated when I say my opinion. I'm like, well, don't ask for my opinion if you don't want it. You know, like
Yeah.
you guys are talking about keeping felons out of our country. Let's hold that to every standard for every felon,
Yep.
including the president of the United States.
And that'll be something we can get into later. Hopefully, I have time to get to it. There's so many different aspects, but absolutely something to talk about in a little bit, hopefully.
Okay.
So just quickly though, guys, I'm going to keep going. So for the block on how to deal with the U.S. and the tariffs, the bloc is calling for pandemic-style wage subsidies for workers impacted by the tariffs. The party has demanded more federal support for Quebec's aluminum industry through tax credits and the redistribution of revenue from counter tariffs. The bloc has also called on the federal government to support the province's lumber industry against threats from the U.S. President Donald Trump through loans and investments in research and development. The party would table a bill to protect supply management and Quebec farmers in future trade agreements. It would table a bill to guarantee local purchasing and reserve a percentage of Canadian content in a public contract and federal procurement, similar to the Buy American Act. It would maintain the digital service tax, which requires foreign and domestic large businesses to pay on certain revenues earned from engaging with online users in Canada if they meet certain conditions. The party would table a bill requiring the House of Commons to vote on a preliminary text of a free trade agreement before it is adopted. So pretty sound, to be honest, guys. As a broader kind of look at it, without diving too much into the nitty gritty on that one, because it can be a bit of a rabbit hole, to be honest. The one thing you're going to notice about the block, and I'm not criticizing, so please don't take it that way, but the block you will find are more geared towards a lot of the stuff to do solely with Quebec. And again, I'm not criticizing, I'm just being honest. And even the Bloc Party really is running to be a voice for Quebec. That is their goal. They know they're not going to form, they're not going to form a government, but they will be a voice in government, and that's really been their goal for quite a few years at this point. It's just to at least have that voice. Um, and quickly, guys, to wrap this one up. So again, we're talking about U.S. Relations and tariffs. The Green Party platform. The Greens would work to ally with other democracies to create joint retaliatory economic measures against the U.S. They would bar U.S. President Donald Trump from the G7 summit in June. They would discuss with other Five Eyes allies the possibility of re-evaluating intelligence sharing with the U.S. They would re-examine the criminal code sections on treason and sedition to protect Canadians against attempts to advocate or manufacture consent in favor of annexation under the duress of economic welfare. They would issue Saving Canada bonds for Canadians to invest in Canadian resources. So that one's honestly pretty solid as well. I agree with all of that, to be honest. Um, and that's another thing you're going to see. There are small differences in policy promises, but generally you have two to three parties that will agree on quite a bit. So you're going to see a lot of the same stuff, but you will have the outliers, and I'll do my best to kind of break down the little differences that are within policy as we move forward. So that's on dealing with U.S. relations and tariffs. So those are the promises at this point. For that, I want to do cost of living next. And there we go. So we're going to dive into cost of living and what the federal parties, platforms have to say on that. Liberals. The Liberals say they would trim 1 percentage point from the lowest income tax bracket. They would also cancel a proposed hike to the capital gains inclusion rate. They would ease access to employment insurance by raising regional unemployment rate percentages and eliminate the GST on all homes up to $1 million for the first time home buyers. Keep that in mind. That little portion there, first time home buyers. It's a key point. I'm going to come back to that. They would suspend rules that prevent people with uh, severance packages from collecting employment insurance for 6 months. That's that's honestly big for people that are affected by the tariffs and being laid off. That's huge. That means that their severance package is not going to affect their EI for 6 months. I can tell you right now that's been unheard of. I've had a severance package in the past, and it absolutely kicked me in the butt when it came to applying for EI, and it was a debacle. So that's really good to hear. Um, that's a key element I think that we need to do to help people get through this stuff. They would increase the guaranteed income supplement, the GIS, by 5% for 1 year. They would reduce the minimum amount that must be withdrawn from a registered retirement income fund, RRIF, by 25% for 1 year. So those are all good things. However, I will point out, in my opinion, some of those things, especially at the end, um, increase the guaranteed income supplement by 5% 1 year. They would reduce the minimum amount that must be withdrawn from a registered retirement income fund by 25% for 1 year. See, and I kind of disagree with that one only solely because it's putting yes, it's allowing people to access their own money. However, you're asking people instead of with that part specifically, you're asking people to help themselves with their own money instead of doing your job and providing that help and providing that kind of support when they need it the most. Um, no, PG, and it absolutely is, but I hope you understand where I'm coming from when I say like yeah, but that's taking from their own money that they're supposed to, at this point, given the cost of living, try and figure out, you know, living off of for however long, right? So it's kind of a tit for tat. That one you could definitely have a good conversation on. Yeah, conservatives, by all means, guys, remember, I'm always welcome to people coming up and being guests and having conversations. So keep that in mind. If you want to come up, by all means. But I am going to move forward. So cost of living under the platforms. I gave you the liberals. Let's move on to the conservatives for now. The conservatives say they would drop the tax rate on the lowest income tax bracket from 15% to 12.75%. They would defer capital gains taxes if the proceeds are reinvested in Canada. They would increase the annual TFSA contribution limit by 5,000 a year, provided the money is invested in Canadian companies. The party would remove the GST on new homes sold for under 1.3 million and on Canadian-made vehicles. It promises to allow working seniors with an annual income under 42,000 to earn as much as 34,000 without paying taxes, and let seniors continue to contribute to RRSPs until the age of 73. Listen, if you look at that solely, it sounds great, but when you look at that on the surface, it looks and kind of sounds great. However, you need to keep in mind that he was a part of the Harper government, and the Harper government moved the retirement age, and the Liberals had to bring it back down, right? So, with that context, and with Pierre Poilievre being okay when the Harper government did that, this is kind of a push. This is essentially telling you that instead of making it easier for our seniors to not work, to retire and enjoy their life at that point, for those that are working, we're going to give you, and absolutely it helps. But at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
they shouldn't be working, right? They
But
should be enjoying their life at this point. They've worked their entire lives, and now it's time for them to relax and enjoy life.
yeah,
Uh,
Serious Leaf actually did a breakdown of this, and it was really good because no one has $5,000 to just put in their TFSA. We know that. And yes, things may have seemed comfortable under Harper, but they really weren't. And that's the thing. I can eat, not a problem. If you, and I'm not saying this about the person who made the comment saying that they could eat, I'm just saying a generalized statement. If you're going to live above your means, you're not going to make it. If you live within your means and budget properly, and this is just a general statement, that will work with you because I live on a budget, on a strict budget. I still am able to afford things. And yes, everyone is struggling. I get that. But we're not going to struggle for long. That's the thing. We're not struggling for long. We need the
yeah,
economic genius to be our prime minister to help us to make it so that we are able to not.
yeah.
And
Just
then again, Shannon, I didn't say you. I said a generalized statement. It's to everybody. I'm
yeah,
not saying you personally.
and the biggest thing, like, and using nuance in this conversation, Shannon, I understand because guess what? I'm in the same boat. I'm struggling just to be able to, make sure I'm fed properly. I'm struggling to do this, do that, really just survive. A lot of us Canadians are. And yes, you're right. It's gotten worse over time after Harper. Absolutely. However, we are a capitalist country, and under capitalism, it allows companies to price gouge us the way that they have been, right? These big grocery corporations are making hundreds of millions of dollars of
Mm-hmm.
profit at the end of the day, right? They're not raising workers' wages, which have, like, inflation is insane, right? You're talking about how hard it is to survive
Mm-hmm.
financially. So workers' wages aren't going up, and those companies are still gouging us, but the trickle down economics doesn't work, right? And that's the issue at this point. If wages aren't going to go up with inflation, of course, this is the issue we're going to see. Yes, it's coupled with a massive amount of other issues leading to the cost of living and how bad it is. But that's corporate greed is the core root of it all. In all honesty, like
Okay,
let's
again, go ahead, Miss.
no, yeah, Shannon, you work 44 hours a week plus, and I don't live beyond your means. The taxes
I'm
don't help. You're
again,
right. The taxes don't help.
my
Go ahead.
statement was not aimed at you, Shannon. It was just me saying there are people out in this country that live way beyond their means. And yes, when you work hard, you should be able to live. Absolutely. But that affordable housing is not available because of the conservatives. That's what I was trying to get at. It
Yeah,
was not a stab at you, sweetheart.
yeah, absolutely. And hopefully I didn't come off as as rough towards you, Shannon. I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to explain better. Um, so hopefully you didn't take that as an attack. It absolutely is not. Just trying to help you understand a bit better. And by all means, Shannon, if you want to come up as a guest and have more of an in-depth conversation, I'm more than happy to do so. I'm always open to conversation, so keep that in mind as well. But moving forward, guys, again, we're on cost of living, so let's move to the New Democrats and what they have in their platform. So the New Democrats pledge to raise the amount of untaxed income from 16,129 to 19,500. The party would eliminate GST on essentials, example being energy, internet, and mobile phone bills. They would keep the proposed increase in the capital gains tax, reinvesting that revenue in universal pharmacare, improving access to healthcare, national rent control, new housing, and a cap on grocery prices. Ooh, I apologize, guys. The party would double the amount of the Canadian Disability Benefit and increase the guaranteed income supplement at combined cost of $3 billion to $4 billion. It wants to open up more $10 a day childcare spots. It would increase the EI replacement rate to two-thirds of insurable earnings with a minimum weekly benefit of $450, extend EI benefits to 50 weeks nationwide, implement a national 360-hour standard to qualify for benefits, and remove the 1 week waiting period. It would expand pharmacare, dental care, and mental health supports for Canadians and ban US style private healthcare clinics.
I love that. Is that the liberal or is that the conservative?
Pardon me?
Is that the liberal?
No, that is the NDP.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so that's all the NDP, and you'll notice a big kind of difference in the platforms too as to where the focus is. A lot of times, the New Democrats are focused on things that you're not going to hear out of the mouths of the Conservative or Liberal Party.
No.
Um, so
And
this is big, and I'm so disappointed that the New Democrats have lost the steam, and unfortunately, like I don't think they can pick up that steam again.
no, and
Um,
after what happened to Jessica, I don't agree with that. I'm not voting them because again, they're all for disability, but then they're going to come down on someone who is on disability, who happen to have an OnlyFans, and that's not okay with me. I'm not going
yeah,
to shame someone for having an OF. If they want to have an OF, that's on them. That's their business. It
no,
doesn't affect
absolutely.
my life, and it shouldn't reflect what kind of person Jessica is because I've seen some of her work and she is amazing.
No, absolutely. And the biggest thing to me too is a lot of people need to realize when we're talking OnlyFans, keep in mind OnlyFans is not just for adult content. Okay, like yes, that's what a lot of people equate it with, but that's not all that OnlyFans is. It's a platform for creators to create content of all forms to put up there, and if people feel so gracious as to follow them and support those creators, then it's another way for them to either make a little bit of
Yeah,
earnings or maybe even a living off of, right?
yeah.
Um,
And one thing I have to say about the Conservative Party's ideologies on the disability tax credit, right? The DTC should not be a non-tax exempt thing. You know what I mean? And it is so infuriating that they're taking that and making it now a taxable, a non-exempt tax, and if you are on disability, you get the DTC. You're now without $200, and they're pocketing it for themselves. And I'm sorry, but conservatives do not care about those who are on the disability, who have are disabled, the 2SL, the BIPOC community. They don't care, and I think that's the biggest frustration I've had with this whole election. Is like, oh, this, and da 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 da. And no, it's not fair to judge someone because they were born the way they were born. You can't help having a disability. And that's the biggest thing that people have to stop justifying. Oh, well, they said this. Yeah, they said that, but they're doing what they say they care about Canadians, but they care about the undisabled, the non-disabled, the non-2SL, and the non-melanated. And that's the problem I have with conservatives.
Yep.
There's
No,
someone that was
absolutely.
talking about the conservatives with me, and they said, hey, Smarsh, not every conservative is a racist, but also not every racist will vote conservative, right? And that really stuck with me because that's the platform they're running on.
Yep, absolutely. Um, so moving forward, I absolutely agree with you, Smarsh, and I think it's very telling too, especially um, I might be able to get into it. We'll see how the night goes, but essentially, there's yeah. Thank you for that, guys. But essentially, part of the conservative platform is to encourage people on disability to get some sort of training or kind of get into the workforce a little bit. And it's like, okay, some people can do that, but some people can't. And to just put the onus on, hey, just get into the workforce instead of if there's something that makes it so unfortunately you're not able to be in the workforce, let's try and help you so you don't fall behind and live in poverty because
Right.
we don't give you a living sustainable financial situation.
You don't. And that's the thing. And it's the non barriers that some people have that they just can't afford to not have. That and it's like with me, I have barriers for employment, but I'm scared that I'm going to be forced to work, and I can't, unfortunately, work. And that's my biggest threat right now
Yep.
is the conservatives. That's why
Uh,
I've never voted liberal. I voted Green Party the first time I ever voted, and I will stand on that because their values and stuff align with mine. I am all for humanity and equal rights because equal rights do not mean fewer rights for you. It's not pie. It's equal rights across the board,
yep.
and I don't
Abs-
debate humanity.
absolutely. Anthony, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, hey, not necessarily on this topic. I was just wondering if you guys would be open to maybe discussing some of the initiatives that the Liberal Party has put in place for the zero emissions vehicle sales by 2035. The reason I'm wondering if you might be open to dialoguing on that is it's been a pretty consistent push from the Liberal Party, and this is obviously it's not a hidden thing; it's right on their website that the
Yeah.
restrictions start in 2026, and then by 2035 it has to be 100% zero emission vehicles only being sold. One of the things that to me is a real struggle to get my head around with this push is like if you look at it right now, there's a major issue with EV sales. Like Dodge just released their Q1 2025 report and they are down 49%. And one of the biggest contributing factors has been their move over to their EV charger, which just cannot sell. So right now, one of the things that's really hard for me to wrap my head around on a economic side is when we look at some of these green initiatives that are forcing manufacturing to quickly shift over to zero emission vehicle sales under the idea that they're greener, which I think is somewhat contested. Just on basic economics, if we force the manufacturers to move in that direction and the market isn't actually purchasing those vehicles, then we're going to be in a really, really difficult economic position. And I believe this is a position that's also supported by the NDP. I'd need to confirm that. I know it's heavily pushed by the Liberals, and just wondering if you have some perspectives on that.
Yeah, sorry, I was quickly just looking at some stuff here. So the biggest thing that I like to point out to people, even before, the election and talking about EVs, the auto industry in North America was already starting to crap out, for lack of better words, right? So, especially in America, and I'll use those numbers because those are the last that I kind of saw and interacted with. Um, but they're really like their stock, whether in warehouse or sitting in a lot has been up by, I think, anywhere between 5 to 10% at this point, which is massive for the automotive industry, right? So, a part of that, excuse me, the reason why I bring that up is because I had predicted, and of course, it's vastly different now given all the different levels of crap that has hit the fan. So, when we're talking about American tariffs on the automotive sector and all that sort of stuff adds extra and extra layers. So I can't even predict at this point. I think when it comes to electric vehicles, the technology is moving forward and is getting better over time. Where I think there might be a bit of a disconnect, um, or where people might disagree with me, is because I think the ambition is admirable. Do I think the technologies are to the best of their performance at this point, and are ready to get to that point to say, hey, let's just completely EV? I don't think we're ready to see that in Canada anyway. Um, but again, I salute the ambition, and I don't think we're going to hit that target, but I think it's a good starting point. And of course, any progression forward is absolutely good. It just might take baby steps instead of jumping forward. Does that
Yeah, to
make
me, one of
sense?
the challenges when you look at EVs, for example, well, number one, the market right now just isn't responding well enough. Like, we don't have market demand. So by 2026, the Liberal proposal to be at a 20% zero emission vehicle sales. If we were to actually implement that for 2026, like right now, the manufacturers would be in big trouble because there wouldn't be enough demand to actually buy those cars.
Well, and that's
So
and
there's a lot of work that has to be done before we can get to that space. And one of the things, like, I understand the idea of wanting to be more progressive, but at the same time, we have to be realistic to what the market actually requires and demands. And if we start producing vast amounts of products that aren't being sold, we're going to be costing mass amounts of Canadian jobs. Like this week, General Motors came out and said that they were considering shutting down their plant in Canada for two reasons. Number one, because of the threat of these tariffs from the US auto sector with Donald Trump. So that's number one. But number two, and they actually said this, because they're struggling to sell their EVs. So right now, like the Cadillac Lyriq, the Cadillac electric
mhm.
vehicle, is in a really, really bad position on sales. So it's kind of, to me, it seems like there's a disconnect when you bring in a policy to force something for manufacturing if the market doesn't have the demand to buy the products.
So, and this is why, like you said, there's the market doesn't have the demand, and I agree with you on that. But that's where I bring in the automotive sector as a whole, because at this point, even before, um, I'd say even before EVs or that goal was set, the automotive industry was already taking a dive, right? It doesn't matter if it's EV, gas propelled, it was taking a dive in general anyway. Um, so my biggest thing was I was saying that the government would give the automotive industry bailouts eventually, back before, again, all the kind of crap and layers we're seeing added onto it at this point, right? So, um, yeah, I really don't have, other than what I've said, that's really the most insight I can give on it. And I think, again, any step forward is good. Do I think, like I said before, do I think Canada is ready to go to 100% EV? Do I think our infrastructure will be able to do it within a matter of, you said 2030?
2035.
So 2035, so 10 years. I mean, if they up their game and really, really focus and, you know, kind of elbows out mentality to get the infrastructure in place, I think they could do it. But again, it's kind of, I think the goal is high hopes, especially with public sentiment. You've really got a lot of work to be able to really convince a good portion of the population that it's a good, sound investment, just because of, it is something new, it's different, and people are absolutely hesitant.
If you don't mind, just to kind of follow up outside of maybe the automotive sector, but
Yep.
a second thing that's been a real challenge for me, I study economics. That's definitely an area that I really like to keep up the tabs on. It affects my
Yep.
business directly. One of the other things that I find very challenging when I'm assessing the Liberal proposals is the proposal for emissions caps specifically on the oil and gas industry. So one of the things that I find challenging with that right now, we're on a tariff from the United States in our energy sector. So we're currently at a 10% tariff for our crude going down south. And if we place emissions caps absolutely restrict the amount of product that we can produce because the production itself does release emissions. So one of the things that seems a challenge to me is if we're getting a tariff from the States, aren't we sort of also getting a tariff from the Canadian government if we cap emissions on the oil and gas
So
industry, limit our
yeah,
supply?
so my biggest point in regards to that at this point would be when we're talking about emissions or say carbon pricing, we need to look at the fact that the vast majority of our trading partners require us to have some sort of pricing on carbon to do trade with them without seeing tariffs. If we do not have that carbon pricing, they will make up for it by tariffing us, right? So that's something we need to keep in context because in the global market, when it comes to trade and everything, if we can't trade without a tariff because we won't price carbon, really we're at a disadvantage right off the get go anyway. And in terms of the pricing and like you said emissions caps, we're talking about the biggest polluters. We're talking about the people, or sorry, not the people, the corporations that contribute the most pollution. Those are the same ones. You said oil and gas. I would like to point out they're the biggest profiting, one of the biggest profiting sectors in Canada, hand over fist, and they also still at this point get government subsidies and tax breaks, leading to even more profit that doesn't really, one of the things the NDP is running on is getting rid of those oil and gas subsidies. And that would bring in billions of dollars of revenue for the government to be able to then turn into the GDP or however you want to say that and be able to spend that money on investing in Canada and Canadians. Does
Yeah.
that does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, I hear where you're coming from. I think the thing we have to keep in mind when you're assessing things like the amount of profit in the oil and gas industry is it's also a pillar of our Canadian economy and it's a pillar of
But they're
actually
making
our
record profits,
production.
right?
Pardon me?
But they're making record profits.
Profits are when you're looking at something that produces one of the largest amount of jobs in the country, then profits is actually a good thing. Wouldn't you agree that we need profitable
Okay,
businesses in order to employ Canadians?
but there's a point to that, right? Like at what point so we're supposed to my biggest thing, like I said, we need to cut the subsidies first and foremost, right? Because that would
Yeah,
bring in so much revenue. And the thing is record profit is the key point. Record profit, right? So it's not the fact that they made the same amount they did last year or the year before or 10 years ago. It's the fact that year after year they are making more and more money quarter after quarter, so their margins, right? Their price margins go down because let's use Alberta, where the Alberta government subsidizes and pays for a lot of the cleanup and stuff that
yeah,
those companies are supposed to do, but don't. So the government pays those for the government of Alberta pays those costs for them. On top, they have federal subsidies and tax cuts or tax exemptions. Um, so essentially, they're getting all this at the expense of taxpayers when they're
right.
making record profit, right? The
I,
government
I,
has
ju-
subsidized them, and they shouldn't be, because under a proper capitalist free market, there shouldn't be government intervention, which means the government shouldn't be subsidizing these companies that are literally the biggest profit making companies in Canada at this point.
right,
PG,
and
did you
But
want to?
a large portion of the subsidy that you're referencing is also infrastructure expansion, which is technically like if you're following that, there's been a lot of Canadian subsidy for the Keystone Pipeline, but the Keystone Pipeline is a Canadian asset. So if we're expanding our infrastructure,
That
which
benefits
expands
that benefits the companies and corporations.
yeah, it
not
benefits them.
only though,
But
not only the companies and corps.
Anthony, do you know that most of our oil and gas companies are bought out by the U.S.? Are you aware of that? So it does benefit the companies more than it benefits us. It really does. When you break it down,
Mhm.
you have a very valid point. You do. You have a valid point, but
Oh,
I'm also going to
absolutely
go to
does.
Moose and say he has a valid point because the subsidies and the government tax exemptions that they're getting should not be given to big, massive companies like that. Because again, it's the resort, and I think it was the XL or the Keystone that ended up having a leak in what, Dakota, one of the Dakotas, I think. I'm not 100% sure
Yeah.
which one it was. But then again, that is not up for the taxpayers to clean up that mess. It should be up to the company who put the pipeline in, and that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be up to Alberta to clean it up. The tar sands in northern Alberta, we have to clean it up,
Well, I
not anyone
understand in
else.
principle what you're saying, but when you look at, for example, the Keystone Pipeline was an investment from the Canadian government. That's a Canadian owned asset. And so if something goes wrong with a Canadian owned government asset, then of course, if there's a problem with the pipeline, it will be taken care of in part by the
Just,
government.
yeah, just quickly then, PG, I want you to chime in because you've been waiting a bit. But again, it's the government owns it, but who benefits from it? And it's the oil companies and corporations. So
And
that's
the
where I have an
Canadian,
issue with that.
not just, but the thing is, you can't separate the corporations from the
But you
Canadian
can.
economy.
You
You
can.
can't,
But you
our dollar,
can.
for
You can
example.
through record profits. You absolutely can. If they're making record profits year after year, which means their margins of profit continue to go up, and they don't pay their fair share like they're supposed to, I'm sorry, but I don't give a damn about their costs because they're
No.
already getting away fucking scot free on paying their fair share. PG, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, they are companies that are primarily owned by U.S. ownership, right? So most of the money that is made by the oil companies don't stay in Canada for one. They get massive tax breaks from Canada, and Canada subsidizes them, and Alberta subsidizes them as well. So when they have wells that they don't want to deal with anymore, they sell them. They create an LLC, then they sell that well to an LLC that will just allow it to go bankrupt, and then nobody owns it, right? And then they're off the hook. So it's an LLC that they created in order to get themselves off the hook. It's a lot cheaper to do that than it is. Oh, the guy left. So anyway, so it's a lot cheaper to do that than to actually clean up your own mess, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and clean up your own mess like you're supposed to. But then Alberta steps in and goes, hey, nobody owns this, so we need to clean it up. So every Albertan is on the hook for that cleanup, and every time I hear from Albertans, it's like, let's protect oil and gas. Why? They're fucking you over
Yeah,
so badly on a constant basis. And you're like, give me more of that. I want more, please. And
yeah,
you know what? Danielle Smith, and I've said this before, Danielle Smith could have, or Sith could have heavily invested um, into renewable energy. Instead, she's like, "Oh, I don't want my skyline to look like fucking
yeah,
like windmills."
yeah. It's
So
it's
what?
it's a bad
Whatever.
view. We can't do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So she doesn't want that. So she puts a moratorium on clean energy, which could ultimately help every Albertan pay less in energy. But no, I want to rely on oil and gas, the most pollutant industry out there,
Yeah.
and you know what, and you guys will pay more for it. That's what's going on, when she could have given you guys clean energy, cheap energy, and
Mm-hmm.
still produce the oil. As a lobbyist that she is, she could have still produced the oil and sold it off to other countries to make new money instead of just regurgitating our own money within ourselves, right? Like
Right.
all
And
of
I
that
live.
all of that argument is nonsense to me. Like, we go to protect our oil and gas. We'll always need oil and gas, but we could reduce the footprint and we could help ourselves along with renewables on the way,
Yep.
right? Like,
Absolutely.
why can't why can't we do both?
And that's one thing I'll add to PG, and I think it's important for people to realize. I've had this conversation before, and it really like I've had it a couple times, but the first time I did, it really like it fucking blew my mind. I apologize for my language. But a friend of mine actually pointed out one time when we were talking about getting away from fossil fuels and getting away from, um, the oil and gas sector. Um, Key thing to remember is like 99.9% of the products in our everyday lives has oil in it, right?
Yeah,
Without that oil, we would not have our phones in which we use TikTok or the computers or the TVs or the toys that our kids have or, like literally everything on my screen right now. If it wasn't for oil,
exactly.
wouldn't exist. Okay,
Exactly. And
so
this is, and to go to that point, oh, sorry for cutting you off, Mace. I have a lag on my phone.
no, you're
But the
okay.
fact is, we don't need to just save oil and gas. We need to save the environment because without the environment, what is gas worth? What is it worth?
Well, and this is, yeah, absolutely. And
It's
like
worth nothing.
absolutely. And it's going to get to the point like, yes, we need to move forward and we need to start moving away from oil as being so dependent on it for literally everything when it comes to manufacturing, energy, all that sort of stuff. We definitely need to move away from it, but it's not going to happen overnight. And until we can find
Nope.
a good enough alternative when it comes to making product, right? Like a lot of
Right.
people say using hemp. Absolutely. Hemp is a great alternative for a lot of different things, right? But I don't think it's a fix all solve all. So we need to
No.
figure out, okay, where can we fill the gaps and with what to be able to continue to move forward. Um, but
And
yeah,
that's
with
the thing that
energy, with the
Alberta
energy
fails to.
sector, yeah. And with the energy sector, again, to PG's point, especially in Alberta, with a lot of times like Albertan energy, I'll use hydro, isn't regulated, right?
Nope.
So they are allowed and they currently do sell more hydro outside of Alberta, whether to other provinces or down to the United States, than they keep and
Hmm.
put into their own grid, right? It's a supply and demand issue. And because it's not regulated, that's the end result of it. And this is
Right.
where I'll say the Liberals, the NDP, and the Green, all actually, and the Bloc as well, I believe, all have it right where it's we need to break down interprovincial barriers, not only for trade, but for resources like electricity and hydro. So essentially, we can have a Canadian grid, and hopefully, with it being fed from across the country, hydro prices
Absolutely.
would absolutely go down, and we'd have more than enough for an entire country, and that
And
includes connecting parts of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, which Wabkanu has already started to process in doing on the provincial level. So
right. And that's the thing. Like in Alberta, I we don't have an electricity cap. That's the thing. We don't have a cap on on hydro or whatever. But our
yeah,
grid isn't sustainable, and our grid should have been redone. But it's going to cost them like billions of dollars, and they don't want to do that. We always have rolling blackouts, and like our grid can't sustain itself. What happens if our grid goes completely down? We're fucked. All of us are fucked.
yeah, yeah, and
We
we've
won't.
seen that in Alberta. In the last couple of years, where you have blackouts or rolling blackouts because it just cannot handle
Well,
what you guys need.
I believe it was 2023, December of 2023, we had that freeze, that
Yeah,
freezing weather. And we're sitting there and we're like, well, what do we do? Like, they want to sustain energy, but they've got all the provincial buildings, all the lights up, and they're not sustaining power. And that's the thing that I have to say about that is it is, oh God, it just drives me nuts.
I think one of the things, one of my bones of contention is that every time we talk about oil and gas and stuff, it's always black or white, right? Like there's no nuance to the conversation when it comes to people supporting oil and gas. It's always, oh, you're against oil and gas. Well, we're not totally against it. We know we'll never be independent of it, I don't think. So, I think we'll always have some kind of dependence, like you just talked about. And I can see a whole bunch of things in your background right now, even to the phone I'm holding. I mean, obviously, we're not going to get away from it. So it can't be an all or nothing, right? And that's always been my point. It's like, can't be all or nothing. Let's just figure out what can we reduce? How can we, how can we help the environment at the same time? And emissions cap doesn't mean production cap. It only means production cap if you refuse to fix your emissions, right? So at that point, then it becomes a production cap. But if you fix your emissions, you can produce all you want, right? Like that won't matter. Fix your emissions. What they want to do is reinvest into their shares, and they don't want to invest in the technology that fixes the emissions, right? And so it's easier and cheaper to complain about it than it is to fix their emissions.
Absolutely. And that's
Hello.
Hey, Ed,
Hi,
did you have something
followers.
you wanted to add in here?
What was the topic? I apologize. I just joined.
Well, we just kind of been talking about oil and gas and using nuance in terms of realizing we need to kind of try and move away from being so dependent on it, but realizing it's not going to happen overnight. And
Oh, how the conservatives say that there's a production cap when there's really an emissions cap, that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
exactly. PG actually just pointed that out.
That's a good
Absolutely.
one, eh? A production cap versus an emissions cap. Like, it's not a production cap they put on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All
Yeah.
right. Just quickly, guys. Ed, by all means, feel free to stay up and continue to chime in, but I do want to move forward. So if you want to just mute for now.
Yeah, go
Uh,
ahead.
And I do want to cover one last thing in the platforms. We're getting later in the show here. I did want to cover Indigenous relations in the platforms for the parties
ooh.
before we end the night. I think it's a very important one to cover. So I'm going to dive into that. So the liberals,
Okay.
when it comes to um, Indigenous relations, the Liberal government doubled the Indigenous loan guaranteed program from 5 billion to 10 billion and opened
Wow.
it to sectors other than energy and natural resources to
Hmm.
support more indigenous led infrastructure projects. If re-elected, the Liberals would seek partnership and consult with Indigenous leaders on how to build Canada's economy and identify opportunities for Indigenous participants in major projects while respecting Indigenous rights. The party would set aside 94 million to upgrade power plants in Cambridge Bay and multiple other places and Nunavut. I apologize. I would not be able to pronounce those places correct, so I'm not even going to try.
You're good.
Uh,
Nunavut is what you're supposed to say.
okay. Um, would allocate 74 million to improving and developing housing. It would
Okay.
spend 66 million to build, repair, and renovate hundreds of homes across Nunavut for Indigenous people and underserved groups. It would put
Wow.
20 million towards helping the Nunavut Corporation complete the first phase of its development of its hydroelectricity facility. It would continue to fund Jordan's principle to support First Nations children and has said that fixing the child welfare system is a priority. So that's what the
Absolutely, it
liberals have
should
on
be.
it.
Oh, that was the liberals. Oh, okay, because you didn't say bring it home or anything, so I took it that was the liberals. Or and
Yeah,
you
so
But
didn't
that
say
you're
the lost liberal decade, so okay, so that was the liberal platform. Sorry. Yeah,
yeah, no, you're
I
good.
think that's excellent that he's doing that. Eh, it's quite detailed, and he's committed to it too. Eh.
Yeah, absolutely. And like sorry, as Marsh had pointed out earlier, it all sounds great, and let's just hope they keep to their word with all parties, depending who gets in and how they'll vote within Parliament when these issues get brought up, right?
can
Didn't he
I just
commit to putting a base in? I can't say the name.
equivalent?
What's it? Sorry.
Equivalent? It's equivalent.
Equilit. Yeah, he's committed to
I
that
don't
too.
know
So
if
that'll help
Carney
different.
promised to get the base going. I think in terms of military, there is a old base there that I believe he talked about getting going again.
Oh.
Uh, that's under the military section, though. I can quickly
That's in the
look as
Northwest Territories, I believe, that old base. Are you guys aware of that base?
well. There's one in Northwest Territories as well, but I believe there's one in Nunavut. Um, If
Oh,
I could be wrong on that. If I am, I
okay.
apologize.
I don't
Um,
know because I thought they just had the Rangers, and then they did have. They don't have any bases up there open now, do they?
no, no,
Wow.
and that's the biggest thing. And you'll see moving forward too. I'll give you the conservative and Democrats as well, or New Democrats, I should say.
Mm,
But there's a lot of similarities,
okay.
but they're all focusing on the north, and there's reasons for that. Whether it's the opening of the corridor for trade, security measures against Russia, all that sort of stuff, right? So there's quite a bit to do with the north.
And I
Um,
think that place remains a lot more. It's becoming more ice free now, so the passage is open. So
well, that's
that's more of a
exactly.
security risk too, eh?
Exactly, and that's why they're looking towards that. And I mentioned Russia, so just to kind of clarify on that one, Russia has been trying to expand their territory in the waters,
Yeah.
getting closer to Canada, knowing that that corridor is opening up, and
Yeah.
trying to kind of get their hand in the cookie jar when it comes to that, because it's going to be a powerhouse of a trade corridor once it
Oh,
gets going, right?
absolutely. But I want to hear what the cons have to say about this because I have something to talk about on the cons section of that. So,
Absolutely. PG, did you want to chime in quick on the Liberals before I get into the other parties on
PG.
it? PG's AWOL. Oh,
Sorry, I was applying a coat of putty, but and maybe not on the Liberals, but I was thinking as you talked about the Northwest Passage, I was thinking that is the reason why I voted for Harper that time, um, because he was strong on the Northwest Passage is ours, and he was standing up to Putin in that time. Now that we know that the conservatives are on the same side as Russia, it doesn't make any sense now, does it?
No, it doesn't.
yeah, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more, PG. Absolutely. Okay, so let's jump into the Conservatives, and then I will do the NDP, the Bloc, and the Green. Of course, we'll talk about it moving forward as we get through them. But so, Conservative platform when it comes to Indigenous relations. The party wants to repeal C-69, the federal government's Impact Assessment Act, which requires respecting the rights of Indigenous people when assessing resource projects. Mwah, 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 mwah. Right
Yeah.
off the hop, guys.
Yeah. Right
Um,
there. So
it
did
would
they
approve.
call it? Did they call it that, or did they call it the energy killing or the anti-pipeline thing in their policy?
Yeah, it. There's so much, right?
Because I know there's a lot of rhetoric in there, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's the biggest thing, and especially too pointing out. I believe it's in here as well. They touch on it briefly, but talking about pre-approved permits for mining and
Hmm.
energy sectors, which would circumvent how things are supposed to be done in terms of if it's on indigenous land, then
Consultation
they
stuff.
need to have a seat at the table, and there
Yeah.
can't be pre-approval without any sort of say from the
Oh,
indigenous community.
you're talking about duty to consult. That's what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
Yeah. Consultation.
yeah. Just making sure that they have a seat at the table and they're being heard, and absolutely being at the forefront of decisions made when it comes to that sort of stuff. Which
Mhm.
I fully agree with them having that seat at the table.
Well, I think
Uh,
that would save them a lot of time in court because that's where it's ending up now, right?
yeah. So moving forward, guys, it would approve federal permits for mining in Northern Ontario's Ring of Fire. Again, he's talking about pre-approved permits, which would circumvent the whole entire,
Mhm.
how it's supposed to be done. Conservatives would incentivize First Nations to support resource development projects through industry taxes. It would support an optional First Nation resource charge, which allows First Nations to directly collect tax revenues based on the use of their ancestral lands. Proposed by the First Nations Tax Commission, the model is designed to simplify negotiations between resource companies and First Nations. It wouldn't preclude communities from following existing impact benefit agreements. The party supports the implementation of Jordan's principle to support First Nations children. It would put back on the table a 47.8 billion First Nations child welfare reform deal.
Okay,
Is
so
that the
one
con?
thing I don't like is the fact that he hasn't committed to supporting UNDRIP.
Yeah.
Yep,
That's scary.
smart.
That's very scary, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree with that 100%.
You
Smarsh?
know, it sounds like he's making up things to get around UNDRIP rather than just saying, I'll respect and I'll try to
Okay.
follow.
Yep,
Go ahead.
Okay. As a person who could speak on this, um, the UNDRIP is an international thing, and all conservatives have voted against it. But it is the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People,
Yeah.
and we need that to protect our treaties, protect our rights, protect everything. And it's so astronomically important that people understand that Bill C-69. I hate those letters. Bill C-69 does not stop pipelines from being built like the conservative people seem to think. All it does is give us a say if we want these on our land or not. And that's the problem I'm having with the conservatives.
yep,
Again, it's not, and the fact that I was talking about it earlier with Moose, the fact that Pierre said on the English debate as prime minister, I'm going to sell off federal land. You cannot sell federal land. Federal land is crown land, and crown land is indigenous land. We didn't give up the rights to our land. We we didn't give up the our land. Or sorry, we didn't give our land to be bought. It wasn't bought; it was taken. But the treaties were signed so we could share the land. It's not us giving up our land. It was sharing the land with the settlers that came into play. And that is a declaration, and that's in the proclamation of the Declaration of Canada. And it is so important that we keep these treaties because if we don't, we're we're SOL without with a paddle going up creek, right? So again,
yep.
we need to do this. We need to protect UNDRIP. And I really don't have faith in here at all because of the thing that, oh, well, it's not a big deal. The treaties will be upheld. No, they won't. Once you get rid of UNDRIP and once you get the treaties are null and void. And that's the biggest thing I'm having a problem with. If he gets in, our rights are gone. Our children, our protected children are gone. There are so many things that the conservatives are against. And
Yeah.
I remember hearing Pierre say one thing that if we keep UNDRIP, it will make it unfair for other communities because their voice is going to be overpowering ours. Well, again, this is our land. It's not anything other than that. And they don't understand that because, again, YT privilege. And that's
Yeah,
what it
and
is.
and UNRWA is put in place for the reason, like the UN as a whole sets standards in which we are supposed to treat people in general, right? Basic human
Yeah.
rights, basic human decency. So when they lay stuff out, there's a reason for it. It's not just an arbitrary, like even when we're talking about basic human rights and decency, like one of the key things I get into, and I think it's telling across the board that we don't follow this for everybody, especially marginalized communities where basic human rights and decency under the UN is a basic human needs is a roof over your head, clean water, and food in your stomach,
Yeah.
essentially. And we do not follow that in Canada currently to date.
And another thing that irks me about PP is he's quite open on pitching John A. McDonald, which is very
Oh,
offensive to First Nations, right? You know,
yes.
calling him a hero, calling him he twisting the actual facts of what happened historically with the guy. You know, like yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that's very offensive to First Nations.
No, absolutely. PG, did you want to chime in quick before I move on to the NDP platform on
No,
Internet?
you can go ahead. I'm out of my element for the most part. Yes.
Okay, well, stay tuned, and if you have something as we're going, by all means, BG, thanks for being here. Okay, so New Democrats. The New Democrats, again, guys, we are talking about Indigenous relations in the platforms for the federal parties. Um, so the New Democrats would support the Nunavut Housing Corporation plan to build 3,000 housing units. They would pave the Cambridge Bay runway in Nunavut to help make air travel more affordable and reliable. They would work with local partners and the territorial government of Nunavut um, to create a hydro fiber link. Oh, yeah, more affordable. Sorry, I skipped ahead apparently. To help make air travel more affordable, they would work with local partners and the territorial governments of Nunavut. Uh, yeah, to improve the energy sector and northern sovereignty. The party would aim to complete construction of a deep water port in Nunavut. It would attempt to re-establish a full-time military base in Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, set up a base as well as new CAF reserve unit in Whitehorse. It would also work with indigenous communities and the territorial governments to establish more deep water ports, including in I can't pronounce that, so I'm not even going to try. I apologize, guys. And Gray's Bay. So two deep water ports is what they're talking about. The party would fully adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, and implement recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The party supports the implementation of Jordan's Principle to support First Nations children. It wants the federal government to co develop a process with the National Children's Chief Commission for future negotiations on First Nation child welfare. Hands down so far, I think it's the best. It lays out more of a plan and it gets to the root of, again, working with the indigenous and making sure that
Yeah,
what's needed is met. That pure and simple.
it's too bad they won't be in power. So that's pretty redundant, that whole thing, right?
No, well, I get where you're coming from, but at the same time, look at what they were able to do without being in power already, right?
I
They were
understand,
able to get us
unless they
dental,
get
they
them
were
all
able to
these.
get us
Yeah,
the lunch program, pharmacare, so
yeah,
many different things, right? So don't count them out fully in terms of being able
yeah,
to get stuff
yeah.
done.
But they do have a lot of stuff that's like, isn't there already a deep sea port in Nunavut?
Uh, that I'm not entirely sure. I know they're
Churchill
talking
Falls
about
is in. Oh no,
getting
Churchill
more.
Falls is in Manitoba, right? Churchill's in Manitoba, right? Where they had the grain terminal.
Yes,
That's a port, also, right? I guess it would be, or it was. Sorry.
it was. Yeah. But essentially, they're talking about getting more than just one as well, right? They're trying to figure out getting multiple ports
Huh.
up there. So again, that ties in with kind of the northern corridor as well, right? Because
Yeah.
even if it's not for trade purposes, it'd be easier for Nunavut to get resources back and forth
Yeah.
with the rest of Canada. So I think it's definitely important. Smarch.
Yep.
What do you think in terms of the NDP platform?
I think the NDP's got a good platform. Again, like I said before, previously
Yeah,
the show started, it's lip service at this point.
yeah,
Until it's actually
um,
taken care of, it's lip service.
yeah. Just quickly too, I seen the comments here. The deep sea port wasn't finished, so
Oh,
they
okay.
started and it was never finished. So thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't know that.
Appreciate that for sure. Yeah, so that's the NDP. I will do the block, the green, and just for context, this is going to be the only time at the end I will give you the People's Party because I think it's really telling.
Yeah,
And you thought the conservative one was bad. Um,
I'll promise to mute. I'll mute my microphone so you won't hear me laughing.
no, that's cool. I still got the block and green to get through. So let's kind of hammer through the block and we'll discuss
Yeah, go.
after
Yeah.
again. Okay, so the bloc would continue to defend Indigenous peoples' rights to self determination and work to ensure that the federal government follows the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It would work on implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action. The party believes that the greatest obstacle to Indigenous peoples' self determination is the Indian Act, which is why the Bloc would support anyone willing to envision a future without the Act while respecting the wishes of Indigenous people. It is in favor of investments for promoting Indigenous language, culture, and traditions. It would work to end federal underfunding of Indigenous police forces. It would keep fighting for access to safe drinking water on reserves. It would push for investments in climate resilient housing for northern communities that are confronted with permafrost thaw, and it would support renewing funding for Indigenous guardians. So pretty solid, honestly, from the block. I don't have much to
Mm,
push back on when it comes to that.
the only thing I have a problem with is getting rid of the Indian Act and supporting anyone who wants to get rid of that because that keeps our rights intact as well. So
Yeah, they
unless they're
should. He.
going to,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, you know more than I do.
No, go ahead.
I was going to talk about um, how they want to support anybody who wants to get rid of the Indian Act. And my understanding is that the Indian Act helps keep the treaties together, maybe? Somebody can correct me on that. And if you get rid of the Indian Act, it kind of feels self serving to the province of Quebec in a way that basically we can now get rid of the Indigenous people
Yeah.
and their treaties. And I just have a general distrust of people who want to make laws and regulations and stuff and changes to what the Indigenous treaties are all about, right? I have the same distrust for people who say that they want to get rid of the monarchy, for example, which is what keeps the treaties together as well, right? Because they without the monarchy, the Indigenous people are no longer friends of the crown, and so
Yeah, I think Yeah, and I think the biggest thing, and this is where maybe it's how I'm interpreting it, might be different. So, just kind of looking it over quick here to find the place I'm looking for. So, when they talk about the Indian Act, calls to action, the party believes the greatest obstacle to Indigenous people's self determination is the Indian Act, which is why the Bloc would support anyone willing to envision a future without the act while respecting the wishes of Indigenous people. I think the biggest thing to me is if they are going to change it, and by all means, Smarsh, I would love to hear what you have to say, because absolutely you're more knowledgeable than I am. But on this alone, like I think if there's a way to create something new that would protect, I guess, Indigenous rights and just Indigenous people better in general, I think would be a good thing, and that might be what he's alluding to. But again, I'm not fully knowledgeable on this stuff. Smarsh?
Okay, so what it is the Indian Act keeps the treaties in place from what I've been reading and what I've been hearing and listening to other Indigenous relatives. So the Indian Act, if we got rid of it, it wouldn't do any good for us. It would go backwards. It would set us back so many years, right? So in that honesty, you have to have, um, correct me if I'm wrong, Pacey, you would have to have an amendment to the act in order to keep our rights and treaties intact if abolishing the act, but they won't do that. So with that being said, getting rid of the Indian Act gets rid of us essentially. If I'm not
As
mistaken,
far
Pacey can take me.
And I think
yeah,
one thing with getting rid of the Indian Act, what are you going to replace it with, right? They don't mention that, eh?
Well,
Okay,
that was kind of my point. Yeah. Um, that's where it gets iffy, but I think that's where maybe I interpreted it a bit different at the beginning. Just
right.
thinking that they would be replacing it with something better, but that might not be the case.
Yeah.
Pasty?
can I put my 2 cents in? Okay,
Yeah.
so for what I've learned with my mom being an Indigenous Studies major throughout university and everything like that, without the Indian Act, our rights that are within the charter that uphold our rights to treaty and everything else would no longer exist.
Yeah, we would be wiped out essentially without the Indian Act.
Yeah. Okay. No, and I appreciate you guys bringing that perspective.
Like the Indian
Absolutely.
Act isn't perfect, but it's better than nothing at all.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a way to control, but it also protects our rights as
Right.
sovereign people.
Yep.
So essentially, what it is, and basically back me up on this if you can. Um, the
Oh, there
Indian
I am.
Act. Okay, I'm done talking.
No, no, please. Sorry, Smarsh. Go ahead, gentlemen. Give us one more minute, and then I'll have you be
Okay,
able
so
to
the
take the
Indian
stage.
Act, the Indian Acts basically would, keep us under, essentially, because it gave us a set of like it breaks. If you read the Indian Act, it's just a whole bunch of like compressed knowledge, and it like shows like where it all adds up for Indigenous people. But in Section 35 of the Indian Act, I believe, and I correct me if I'm wrong, Casey, it would give us maybe more of a sovereign because we are sovereign nations within a nation. So again, we need self-govern. I believe we just got self-governance. I will look that up and give you the information because I don't want
Yes,
to say
under
too much on that.
yes, under the Indian Act, it gives us the right to self-governance.
Okay.
But
Uh,
without the Indian Act, we're done. So
yeah.
that's all I'm
Well,
saying.
and that's where, like I said before, like if they wanted to replace it, absolutely would be a process, would be a massive overhaul, and again, making sure Indigenous communities have a say at the table if they were to kind of replace with something else, right? Gentlemen, did you want to chime in? I
Yeah,
appreciate the
you
waiting.
know, you hear they're talking about Canada being the 51st state of America.
We've heard that before. It's nothing new.
Yeah,
That's not gonna
we've heard it. Yeah, what about that?
that's not gonna happen. The whole
No,
world,
absolutely not. No.
the whole world is gonna be united as one.
No.
Well,
Money,
I don't think that's quite going to
money,
happen, but I get your sentiment.
100%, 100%. You don't know who I am. And money within the next 3 months is gonna be gone. Drugs, cigarettes, alcohol is gonna be taken off the planet. Gambling, everything, all evilness is gonna be gone.
Oh my
All
God.
evil. Okay, so
He's
we're
a very
looking at
religious person.
we're talking about things to do with the election here in Canada and platforms. So if you
Wait,
have something to chime in on that, I'd love to hear
You,
it.
you
where am
do
I
know
going?
with
Where am
the
I going? If all
political
evil is going, where
stage,
am I going?
you
Oh,
do know
you
that
do
they're all
stop.
puppets.
Okay, okay. We're not talking about religion right now. We are
No,
talking
I'm not talking
about the
religion.
election.
I'm saying
Oh,
with elections and all that, they're all puppets. It's all a
So
stage.
okay,
sorry.
Hey, you.
so who are they puppets to? Can I ask that?
The
Christ.
Oh, Christ. Oh, my God.
Oh my God.
I'm not
You
going to talk
mean what?
religion, and don't talk about me either. I'm not going to talk about religion.
Well, okay, but even
You're
even
bringing
with
up
that,
religion.
Christ doesn't have a bearing on the topics at hand, right?
Christ is
Right.
in everybody.
No,
He's
Christ
the
doesn't
puppet
exist.
No.
What
master.
are you
Excuse
talking
me,
Okay.
about?
guys,
No, thank
stop.
you.
Full stop, full stop, full stop. Gentlemen, I would ask you to respect the fact that there are people that do not believe in Christ, especially on this panel and in this live right now. So please respect that and realize that we're not going to dive into a conversation based on somebody's beliefs or one religious belief. Okay, so please keep that in mind moving forward. Um,
I'm just wondering, regardless of the religion and all that, doesn't people believe that it all started from two people?
Oh my God, dude, we're not
okay,
talking religion.
No.
The fact,
Smarsh. I understand, sir, that you have your belief systems and you have your religions, and I will not ever
It's who
criticize
I am, though.
somebody.
That's the thing.
Okay, but hold on. I will never criticize somebody for having a belief system or believing in a religion or a faith. Okay? I will absolutely fight for you to have that right and to exercise that right. However, again, we are on a panel of people that don't all believe in the same thing. So I would ask that you be respectful. And when
Yeah,
we're talking
I'd
about stuff like we
recommend.
have been, that we talk about the facts and we talk about the policies and the stuff that we're, clearly trying to talk about without bringing in religion, because at this point it has nothing to do with religion. It has to do
Well,
with
let you
policy
know,
and change
it's with
within the
Christ
system.
coming back. This is where things are going to
okay,
change.
dude,
And this is,
dude, stop.
Okay, Smarsh, I got this. Okay, so that's the last warning. I've muted you. You can unmute yourself from this point on, but if you do it again, I will take you down off the panel. I respect your beliefs and your religion, but again, that's not for everybody on this panel or in this live, so I ask you to respect that, please. Thank you. So, moving forward, guys, let's get into the Green Party and what they have to say when it comes to Indigenous relations in Canada. So the Green Party would put the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples
I'll let you go
into
now.
action.
I am
Thank,
God.
thank you very much
Bye.
for chiming in and thank you for coming up onto the panel. We appreciate it.
What the
Thank you so
hell?
much. The party would put the oh, I read that, sorry, into action. It would act on every call to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as well as every call for justice from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry. It would fund restorative justice programs. It would support Indigenous communities searching former residential school sites. It would support an Indigenous led end to the Indian Act. So, another call to end the Indian Act, but made sure to point out that if that were to happen, that it would have to be an Indigenous led end to the Indian Act. Thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
No, indigenous.
Yeah, that's where
Yeah.
and that's where I think they did better in clarifying
Yeah.
than the block did with that, where they specifically point out like, no, it has to be Indigenous led. So
And it
definitely
sounds
getting
like they'll
right to
use
the
UNDRIP as their framework or their foundation for a new act or whatever, right?
yeah, changing from the Indian Act to some other policy or whatever it ends up being, right?
Yep.
Absolutely. Pasty Native, Smarsh, PG. Did anyone else want to add into that?
I'm sorry, I didn't fully hear. My brain's still reeling from the religious zealous that was in the panel.
I was
I
gonna
shouldn't
tell
be
him before
laughing. I'm
you
sorry.
dropped him. Oh no,
Because
Sorry,
sorry,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
I've
Smarsh.
got religious trauma to the nines.
So do
God,
I,
no.
and that's why. Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
tell the religious person that Jesus is non-binary.
And I mean, really, by definition, Jesus was a communist too. So keep that in mind.
And he slept with
Also,
what do you call it? A parking lot lizard.
There's also the claim that you can make that Jesus was most likely trans because he was born to just a mother, meaning he would
Right.
only have double X chromosomes.
Well, Jesus
You
was a
know,
trans man. Then he drove a Trans Am.
I heard he was a really good carpenter.
Yes.
This is
uh,
the thing.
all right, guys. Uh,
This,
let's kind of. I want to throw this in, and I know this is probably going to hurt people's heads a little bit, and make you shake your head. But to tag on to the end here, guys, I am going to give you the People's Party perspective when it comes to Indigenous relations.
Okay,
So
I'm gonna hear.
Oh, hang
hang
on.
on to
Just
your
kidding.
butts.
Hang on.
It's a bit of a bumpy ride. So the People's Party, in
Before
re-
we move forward, I
in
just sorry.
regards to Indigenous relations on their platform, I hate that I'm even saying it. It would replace the Indian Act with a new legal framework to guarantee Indigenous peoples equal rights and responsibilities as Canadians,
Responsibilities?
and to promote the self reliance of communities. It would seek to establish individual property rights on reserves. It would ensure that Indigenous communities take more ownership of the service they receive in partnership with various levels of government. It would review federal spending to ensure that programs are better targeted to benefit Indigenous communities that have the greatest needs.
Well,
okay,
one
what
thing I don't like on there is that they say responsibilities. Why not jurisdictions? It sounds very paternalistic.
Okay, Apple. I want to talk to Apple. I am not responsible for the Canadian government unaliving my ancestors. I'm not responsible for that. Just like you're not responsible for your ancestors' actions. It's how we move in life. No, 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 no,
Apple,
no. No, see,
Apple,
sweetheart.
this is Apple's warning. If you can't be respectful, because at this point, the two things that I've seen you say is rooted in
Very rude.
bigotry, and I'm not having it. So this is your warning. Be respectful, or please leave, or I will make sure that you find the door.
So
The
Um,
thing is,
the Canadian government gives Indigenous peoples money in reconciliation. That is money that is owed to them by the Canadian government. The Indigenous peoples also have their own trust fund, and it's massive. And with people keep talking about how we keep giving them money, it's the other way around. We keep borrowing from that trust fund,
no,
right? So
no,
we,
no,
we
there's no,
continue to do that over and over and over again. And
Yeah.
so
but
we're not
PP.
giving them money. We're, and the things that you've read about the platform on the platforms is a long way of saying we're going to go in there and negotiate with Indigenous peoples to make them think that it's their idea that we're going to take away everything that they have.
Yes.
Okay,
That's what
so
it means.
PP, it's not the government borrowing, it's the government stealing money from that trust account because they were never asked. They never asked anyone about this money they took. They were never asked
That's fair.
about the infrastructure. They were never asked about everything. They just took. And you
That's
know
fair.
what? I am not a First Nations person. I am a Métis. But here's the thing: I am a person. I'm an Indigenous person who lives in Canada. I'm not a squatter. Thank you.
Yeah, and also we basically taken their land, so we should be paying them rent, not what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I agree.
yeah, absolutely. Sorry, guys. I was muted and forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, and
I
this
think we
is
preface it
this is
as borrowing, but I think so. I agree with that.
what was that, PG?
I said I think that we preface it as borrowing, but I'll agree with the stealing part.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, 100% agree with that.
It's almost like if you guys had a trust fund set up with the Canadian government, with the Indigenous people, and Indigenous people took money from you guys. But knowing that you guys were the trust, knowing that we were the trustees, right? And you guys were the recipients of that money. It
But so many of those policies sound like bribery in a lot of their aspects when you think about it, eh? They're just trying to bribe First Nations, not give them a input into managing the resources or you know what I mean? Like working with non First Nations people. It's just like we'll bribe them and you know what I mean?
But okay, so this is my theory as one person talking about one person, right? Our indigenous community is not a monolith, so I'll speak from my point of view. Okay. The reason why there is corruption within our community with chiefs and council is because all the government does is just hand us money more than we want an apology, we want land recognition, or we want land back. They just shove money in our face. And I think over time that just got so comfortable with the money they were given, they didn't they didn't see the bigger picture with the money just giving them. They're giving the government was giving these chief and councils. Again, one person, not speaking for the whole community, just speaking as myself. And this is the problem we have today, because people are like, "Oh, we just give them too much money." No, you owe us too much money, and if you guys were to pay us back, Canada wouldn't be Canada anymore. And you got to think about it this way, Apple. If you're still in the room, um, Canada wouldn't be Canada if it wasn't for the Indigenous people as well. So if you think about your country, you got to recognize that Indigenous people were here first. The more you
And
know.
also keep in mind again, going with what you said, Smarshy, this was Turtle Island before it was North America or Canada or
Yeah,
any of that.
exactly.
So
And that's the thing, right? Like, I call it Turtle Island, but every time I call it Turtle Island, I get called disrespectful, and I'm trying to just find an even ground. I know it's Turtle Island. They see it as Canada, but without me and my ancestors and everyone else's ancestors, even Pacey's ancestors, you guys wouldn't have what you have today.
yeah,
So if you're gonna take credit, give credit where credit's due. It's kind
yeah,
of like if you see something and you make an agreement with people, hold that agreement true. Hold your word. Keep your word, or otherwise you're just another person taking from people who don't deserve to be taken from.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Did anyone else want to chime in on this before I wrap it up here? No one. Okay. So at this point, guys, I am over time quite a bit. I always end up over time, which is okay. Enjoy the conversation. I want to thank everybody that has been up on the panel tonight. I really appreciate it. I love hearing the perspectives, and how you perceive, especially when we're talking about platforms. It's good to have different perspectives and how different people perceive different things, right? So thank you so much for everyone up here. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
always
take
great
care. Have a good
conversation.
evening.
You too, Ed. Thank you so much. The Pacey Native, I just want to quickly do a shout out to you if you want. Did you want to plug your show quickly?
Sure. So Fridays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, we have the Rainbow Connection on the wonderful Beaver Network, and we talk about 2S LGBTQIA problems and rights that may be impacted with the way the world's currently going. We also just try to have a safe space for queer people to be able to come and talk about experiences they may have had within their own life. So if you'd like to join us, that's Friday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Please. We need
Awesome.
more
Thank
good
you.
people.
Thank you for that. Yeah, guys, Pacey Native is over on the Rainbow Connection here on the Beaver Network. It's a fantastic show. So again, check it out when you get a chance. It's fantastic. I learn quite a bit when I tune in and take part. So definitely encourage other people to do the same. Gives you a different perspective, and how what today's world look like really does affect people within the LGBTQ community. Um, so definitely tune in for that, and it's a fantastic show. Sean as well is here in the comments. Is the other host of that one. So to both of
That's my
you. Great
wonderful
job.
co-host. I feel like crap. I should have shouted him out.
No, all good, all good. I saw Sean's name down there, so it just reminded me. Sean's fantastic as well. You both do a fantastic job. So thank you for that. PG, thank you for coming up and being a part of the conversation. Sounds like you're busy working over there, but I
Thanks for
appreciate
having me up. Yeah, I'm always working. Always.
you.
Never ends.
There you go. Hopefully, I can say the same soon. Um, the season changed, so I had that down period, and now I'll be getting into doing a lot more. Hopefully, starting here shortly. So I feel
Oh,
that one soon.
nice.
Yeah. Alrighty,
Yeah.
guys. Well, thank you. Oh,
No, we're good. We're good.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, so much for sticking it out tonight. I really appreciate it. Again, thank you to the panelists. Thank you for coming up. I look forward to having conversations with all of you again sometime soon. So, as always, guys, until next time, stay safe, stay sane, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and I'll see you guys soon. Have a good night.